In this video, I'm covering 5 draft lessons you can learn from Lorwyn Eclipsed to help you find more success in future sets. First up, gold cards make a huge difference. Now, it might be pretty obvious that a card like Deep Channel Duelist is going to make your blue-white decks a lot better, or a Thought-Left Lieutenant is going to make your green-white deck a lot better. These gold cards, so-called because they have that gold border associated with multicolored cards, these cards make a big difference to your deck as a payoff that you can get without needing to have a rare or mythic rare. You just kind of can draft these. Other decks can't use them as well, so if you find the open lane, you can get some of these, or they can be a nice reason to go into a particular deck. And the fact that only 5 color combinations had these in Lorwyn Eclipsed not only meant that those decks got these extra payoffs, but also that they were getting a lot more support from a design perspective, where if you're just reading the cards, you could think, hey, that card might go into a black-white deck, or that card might go into a blue-black deck, because there were some payoffs for drafting those decks. A card like Reaping Willow is really easy to cast in your black-white deck because of the hybrid mana. A card like Voracious Tome Skimmer is much better in a blue-black deck. So you might think, okay, I could draft these decks. Sure, I'm missing out on those multicolored uncommons, but I'm still going to be able to get a couple of payoffs for my deck. And while these decks were draftable sometimes, they were also a lot weaker because not only did they not have those gold cards for extra payoffs, they also weren't supported as much. So not getting those gold cards is not only a sign that maybe the deck is going to miss out on a payoff, but also that it's not going to have the design in mind for the set to make that a strong deck. So just keep that in mind in future sets where there are certain supported archetypes. Those are definitely kind of the main ones to go for, and these are more off ramps. So we'll be keeping an eye out for that in future sets that maybe use this design philosophy. Next up, decks with finicky mechanics take some extra effort. The Goblins deck in Lorwyn Eclipsed was really hard to draft off the bat because you think, oh, I'm playing Goblins, I'm trying to attack my opponent, I'm trying to just be a conventional aggro deck, and Goblins played out a little bit weird. A card like Boggart Cursecrafter, sure, it's got great stats, it's a 2/3 death touch attacker, it's going to help you push damage early, but its ability of your Goblins dying, dealing 1 damage to the opponent was really like a key piece of this Goblins puzzle, where you'd kind of get a Cursecrafter in play, you get like a Boggart Mischief in play, which also makes your opponent lose life when your Goblins die, and then you kind of end up in these board states where you weren't really necessarily getting as much card advantage as your opponents, but every time one of your creatures died, you did some damage to them, and so they were just kind of in this inevitability loop where they felt like they were slowly getting their life total chipped away until you eventually won. And Goblins being that sort of deck, it was a little tricky because death triggers are definitely harder to assemble, those types of engines, then enters the battlefield deck synergies. Like a Kithkin deck, you just play your creatures, when they enter, they trigger something. Goblins, you have to be like, okay, how am I going to kill off my own creature, especially if your opponent doesn't want to block that creature. So you attack them with a 1/1, they don't block it, you don't trigger your cards. So it can be a little bit of a finicky deck, and that doesn't mean that it's undraftable. That can be one takeaway some people could take, like, oh, I just didn't want to draft Goblins. It just takes a little bit of extra effort to draft these decks, and sometimes they're not going to be worth going for. In this case, Goblins could definitely get the job done. You just had to put a little bit of extra thought, and you had to do a little bit of more preparation to be able to draft these decks successfully, because they didn't necessarily play out in a conventional manner. The next lesson, cheap 2-for-1s still dominate. Now, that's always been something good in Limited, getting those 2-for-1s, which means you play a card that maybe draws you a card, it replaces itself. And that was really on display with cards like Eclipsed Elf and Eclipsed Kithkin, which were not only some of the best uncommons in the set, they were just straight up some of the best cards in the set, including rares, including mythics. These cards might look a little innocuous. You play a 3-mana 3/2, you get a forest off of it. Or Eclipsed Kithkin, you play a 2-mana, you get a 2/1, you draw another Kithkin off of it. That might not seem like anything crazy. It's not like a big game-ending effect, like a creature that enters and deals 4 damage to everything else, or a big dragon, or something flashy, but these cards are still premium cards. When you see these sorts of things, they pull you into the deck, you take them really highly, and cheap 2-for-1 cards have been great in Limited for a long time. They're still great in Limited, and don't like sleep on these cards just because maybe, oh, I played a 2/1 and it got me a Plains. Maybe that's not the most exciting thing. It ends up being a really big impact on the game, and these were another reason why the supported archetypes were really good, because the gold cards were also included the hybrid cards being these Eclipsed cycle, and those cards were really fantastic as well. So don't sleep on those cheap 2-for-1s. Those cards are going to be absolutely fantastic in this format, and they're going to be fantastic in future formats. With that said, top end can still be premium. Now, these cheap 2-for-1s are oftentimes the headliners. You're like, oh wow, this card's really good. And sometimes that can mean that as a result, you skew away from expensive cards that are also going to be pretty good. So a card like Shine Strike, you're like, wow, I'm getting a bit of value from when I play my 3-mana 3/2 that draws me another elf. Would I still want to prioritize a card like Shine Striker? And this was a very strong card. You could get oftentimes drawing 2 cards, 3 cards for your 6-mana 3/3 flyer, and that could like win you the game in your late game Vivid decks, or even a 2-color deck could oftentimes draw 2 or 3 cards off of a card like Shine Striker. Kolrath Zealot was a surprise kind of, for many, a surprise like top performer, because a 6-mana 6/5 just doesn't seem flashy by today's standards. Sure, you're getting a bit of value out of it, but it's a 6-mana 6/5 at the end of the day. Basic land cycling, you don't really want to be spending the early turns doing that anyway. But it turned out when you cast this card, exile the deck card, top card of your library, you were just churning through your deck, getting value. 2-for-1s are still going to be really, really valuable. And even if they cost a little bit more mana, getting like reasonable stats out of it while drawing cards is still going to be good. Sure, a 6-mana 6/5 is not a card you would usually play in the vacuum, but add that exile clause, all of a sudden it's one of the best red commons. Shine Striker, 6-mana 3/3/5, you wouldn't play that, but once you're drawing 2 or 3 cards, you're pretty happy putting this effect in your deck. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention a card like Moon Vigil Adherence, which just doesn't have any card advantage associated with it, but it was just a giant creature. You'd play this and it would be a 4-mana 10/10, 4-mana 13/13. I once got this to over 20 power and 20 toughness in a game where I was making a bunch of tokens, and these sorts of giant creatures can still have a big impact. It might be like, oh, but it dies to removal and leaves you behind, but oftentimes if the card is big enough and you're getting good enough stats, you should still keep an eye out for them because they can absolutely take over the game. Moon Vigil Adherence is the perfect example of that because it just was raw stats. You were getting a big creature, and that could definitely be good enough, and it was also a premium uncommon to keep an eye out for. And then the final tip for taking into future sets, in synergy sets, which this one definitely was, staying flexible can really pay off. There were a lot of cards that only really fit into one home. There'd be a card that was really good in Kithkin and really bad everywhere else. A card that was really good in your Elves deck and wasn't really playable in other situations. And if you were willing to stay flexible and figure out what you were supposed to be drafting in your seat, you could really benefit from getting these cards late, because even if there was another green drafter, they weren't going to be taking the good green cards for your Elves deck if they were playing a green-white Kithkin deck. Or similarly, if you were trying to play a Merfolk deck, you could get your Merfolk cards much later than you otherwise would have if you identified that that was open in your pod. And rares like Marilyn, which is really an inflexible card that really only goes into a green-black Elves deck that's trying to splash it, or a card like Sunderflock, which is really good in elementals, and if you're playing a Merfolk deck, you can't even really cast it very consistently. These are some sorts of cards that I got past, many people got past these cards, and sometimes you had to pass them yourself, and you don't really feel good about that. But if you're drafting the deck, the format, and you don't have any huge power level to cling to, staying open can lead to getting these sorts of cards really late for your decks. Maybe pick 4 in pack 2, you get past a Sunderflock, and because you've been staying flexible and be like, okay, I've got some just generically strong blue cards, I'm able to take this Sunderflock, and all of a sudden I do now have a card to build around. Or you're playing your deck, you've got a little bit of green, you've got a little bit of black, but maybe you're like deciding whether to play Kithkin or Goblins, you just aren't exactly sure, and then all of a sudden you get past a Marilyn like 5th pick, and you're like, okay, now I have a really strong rare I can go for. And also, these are also rewards for once you do find the open lane. So even if you stay open and you don't like commit to a color combination because you see something like a Marilyn, if you are drafting and you're like all of a sudden realizing, okay, green black's open, all of a sudden pack 3 rolls around and you're getting past like Marilyn's 6th pick or something like that. That definitely can happen in this sort of format where you're like, okay, I get this really strong card for my deck way later than I should because I was really disciplined, reading signals early, figuring what I should be drafting, and because I was able to do that, I was able to get these strong payoffs late. And that's a really big takeaway from this sort of format. If you are able to if you don't have a reason to commit to a colors, staying flexible can really reap some benefits for you later because you get these powerful cards later because other decks just simply can't use them effectively. That's going to do it for this video though. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it to the end, leave hashtag Lorwyn Lessons in the comment section down below to let me know you made it to the end. That's going to do it for this one though. I hope you enjoyed it. Best of luck in this format and any future formats you're playing, and I'll talk to you next time.